Let's go! Chris King! Chris King! Chris King! Chris King! Chris King! Chris King! The weather guy!
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special edition of Chris King, the Weather Guy, where we are going to be taking a very in-depth look at the changes, very recent changes, that the Storm Prediction Center has made in regards to how they're going to communicate tornadoes, wind, and hail. Okay, so this is a big change. It's one of the biggest that they've made in a really long time. And when you start seeing people like me and others start displaying this information, especially in severe weather season, it can kind of look confusing. So this would be a good time to just sit back, relax, look and see what these categories have changed. And I'm going to try to make it very easy for you to understand, simplify the process. So that way, when you see these graphics, it won't look all big and scary. It won't look super confusing. So let's get right to it. Okay. So here's going to be the guidelines that the Storm Prediction Center has changed, and it's on the categorical. So that means the tornado, the wind, and the hail. So let's talk about what's not going to change. Okay. What's not going to change is the categories that you already know. And so if you didn't know anything about the Storm Prediction Center, these are the guys that pinpoint where severe weather is going to be. And so we're going to actually use a real case from last year, and we're going to look at what we now will officially call the legacy models of this, and we'll look at what that's going to look like moving forward. So what's not changing are the categories. So we got all the way from marginal, which was a level 1 out of a 5, which would be up here all the way into the Ohio Valley, Ohio region, all the way to a high risk, which was in parts of Alabama into Mississippi. Okay, that's not going to change. Now, here is the legacy model, the old model on the tornado probabilities. So now what we're doing is we're going to break down the severe weather into these 3 categories. Why was it a high risk? Well, it was a high-risk day for parts of Alabama and Mississippi because there was a 30% chance of seeing tornadoes develop within a 25-mile radius. And that 25-mile radius also applies to the moderate, which we were under at 15%, and then 10% in the slight, 5% in the marginal, and then the general thunderstorms would be 2 here. So the point is, do you see the hatching? Looks like strawberry to me. And what that means is that any place inside of this hatched area could have seen a significantly severe tornado, which would have been an EF2 plus. Okay. So all the way up in parts of, the Cumberland Plateau, almost over here to Knoxville, but all the way down into the high risk, you could have seen one. But watch how this changes for this year, and how I think if you just kind of listen to this, the Storm Prediction Center is doing a better job of communicating with us. So here's the old. Here's the new. Let me go back a second. Here's the old. I feel like an optometrist. 1 or 2. And so when you look at this, nicer graphic, by the way, but I want you to notice all the different types of hatching that they have done inside of the tornado probabilities. And so we're going to talk about what that means in just a second. We're going to break down which of these intensities, what's it mean. And so if you look right over here to the side, my logo kind of covers up a little bit of it. But if you see the intensities right here, there's 3 levels of intensity now that the Storm Prediction Center is going to communicate with us of where they think maybe the strongest area of tornadoes could be. So let's dive down to what all of this means. So let's go to the next slide, and then we'll come back and I'll do a forecast for you. So tornado, if you have no hatching at all, none, that just means mostly weak tornadoes, EF0 to EF1. And if we think about southern middle Tennessee, we think about middle Tennessee in general, that's mainly the types of tornadoes that we have anyway, and that's predominantly for most. So there'll be days where we have a tornado risk, and there'll be no hatching at all. When we start getting into hatching, we start getting into strong and violent tornadoes. So if you see the strawberry little dashes, this means that we could have all the way up to an EF2 tornado, okay? So not just an EF2, but up to an EF2, okay? That would be the maximum that you could have. Okay. Now, if we start getting the slanted lines, now we're jumping up to an EF3. So just the difference between a 2 and a 3 changes the hatches completely. And then when we get into that grid or the diamond looking here, you're going to look at a violent tornado situation. That's going to be the EF4s and EF5s. Okay. So now that we've kind of look at what all the hatching means, let's go back to the previous slide and let's talk about the areas, okay? So what we can do is we can pinpoint now and we can say the area that we could see the most violent tornadoes that could cause injuries and possibly fatalities would be right here in parts of Mississippi and extreme western Alabama, kind of really close to the Tuscaloosa area there. This would be where the strongest tornadoes, an EF4 or 5 is possible right there. Inside the next round, which would be the slanted lines, that would be us. That would be up to an EF3 tornado. So how much more when I'm thinking about it from my aspect, when I can turn around and tell you guys we could see an EF3 tornado today, that really clearly communicates better and really heeds warnings better. When you hear that, like, hey, there could be an EF3 today, people are really going to start to take notice. And then you can see the EF2 all the way into these areas up into northern Middle Tennessee over into the Plateau region. They could see up to an EF2 tornado. Okay. So that being said, that's really like I said, it looks confusing at first, but when we start breaking down each little section, it really helps clearly communicate a little bit better. So a lot of research has been gone into this, and they've beta tested it for a while. They're finally just ready to roll out. Okay, so that's tornado. So we're going to skip through the tornado and let's go to the wind category. Okay. So same setup on March 15th. So this is the same day. We were under a 45% risk of seeing a significant severe weather event. So significantly severe in the legacy model, the old model, would mean that we could see wind gust up to 74 miles an hour. So you would hear the Storm Prediction Center throw around the words hurricane gust, okay? Hurricane force wind gust. So here's what it's going to look like now. Not much has changed here, but we do have 3 levels in intensity because that day that we were going to have wasn't really the setup for wind as much as tornadoes. But let's talk about what all of these categories mean, okay? So we'll get into the strawberry, okay? Well, first of all, let's back it up. If you don't see any, that's going to be all the way up to 73 miles an hour. That's going to be most of the time for us when we see wind events. Just remember, 58 miles an hour is what constitutes as a severe thunderstorm warning, okay? So when we have the strawberry, it's going to be, again, that's where we used to get the old significant severe all the way up to 74 miles an hour. But now we have 2 more categories. So if we had slanted lines, that literally means 84-mile-an-hour wind gust. Insane. And you want to talk insane? Look at this last one where we do the grid system. We're talking 94-mile-an-hour or greater wind gust. How crazy that is. That's when you start probably forecasting a derecho. This is when you have PDS severe thunderstorm warnings. You never really hear those around here in southern Middle Tennessee, but they do exist. So that's the wind parameters, okay? So the last thing we need to look at is hail. So this was the hail setup for March 15th. And so you're looking at the fact that we're right there on the fringe of a crosshatch there of a 15% risks. Basically, anything that's in the strawberry meant that you were going to see 2-inch hail or greater. So 2-inch could go all the way up to 7 inches. Not that we have that here. That's mainly reserved for maybe the Dakotas, this area up here during the summer months. But you're going to notice here, we still have an intensity scale, but it's only 2%. Okay. Excuse me, not 2%, but just 2. And so let's talk about what the 2 types of hail look like. So, none is just going to be mostly less than 2-inch hail. That's what we normally get. Very rarely do we see anything greater than 2 inches. Not say we can't. It's just not usually our setups. When you see the strawberry, the dashed lines, you're going to get greater than 2-inch hail, tennis ball. And then the solid lines are going to be greater than 3.5-inch hail. So that's softball size, enough to do some significant damage. Okay. So one last slide before we're done here. And this is a big matrix and there's a lot of stuff going on here. I just suggest maybe you take a second to kind of pause it because I'm just going to kind of mention some things. But this is what the Storm Prediction Center will now use using the significant categories. They say SIG down here. No, not cigarettes. Okay. Every time I see it, that's what I think of. But these are the new intensity scales. So just to kind of put things in perspective, when you see the less than significant one, that would be where, if I back it up a minute, this would be the none category. So there would be no hatching here or here or here, okay? And then there's those level of hatchings. So long story short, if we had tornado probability of 60%, okay, but they're only EF0 and EF1s, the highest that we could be issued is an enhanced risk. And so you're going 60% of tornadoes and only enhanced risk? Well, Storm Prediction Center believes, EF0s and 1s, while they are tornadoes, they're considerably weak. They don't do a ton of damage, so that's only warrants an enhanced risk. But if you get an EF2 tornado, which would be on the significant 1 scale, that would be the strawberry, you jumped up to a high risk, okay? And so this would just be tornado probabilities. You don't have to get a high risk day with tornadoes. You can get them with just wind. And so if you had a 90% chance, which now I'm going to pause and say one thing I need to note is that the probability percentages for wind have changed. They used to be in line with tornado and hail, but they have changed the parameters here. So it goes from a 5 to a 15 to a 30, 45, 60, but now they have a 75 and a 90. They've added these two categories. So to put things in perspective, if you had a 90% chance of seeing wind event greater than 94 miles an hour, that would be a high risk situation. Yeah, I could definitely see that one. And so all the other things follow. And then hail, of course, the highest you could get if you had, you know, softball size hail and a 60% chance, that would definitely be a moderate risk. You can't actually get a high risk from hail. The only way you get a high risk is from wind and tornadoes. So I suggest maybe you take a second and pause this and kind of look at it. And so when you hear the Storm Prediction Center saying, hey, we're under a slight risk, we're under an enhanced risk or whatever, why is it? What type of severe weather is making that category what it is? Okay. So there it is. There you have it all in all of its glory, all the things from the Storm Prediction Center. So I know it can be a lot to kind of ingest. Maybe just take a little bit and definitely go back over and look at these. I'm going to take the graphics that you saw on the slides. I'm going to be posting them out to the page as well. And so, again, big changes coming from the Storm Prediction Center. And I think in the long run, it's going to better communicate to the public exactly the types of the severity of severe weather. How bad's the tornado going to be, right? How bad's the wind going to be? How bad's the hail going to be? And I think once we get over this initial phase of just getting used to it, of what it's called now versus what it used to be called, I think it'll be smooth sailing. So, guys, thank you very much. A little bit longer edition of Chris King, the Weather Guy, but wanted to give you everything that you need to stay informed, especially during times of severe weather, okay? Hey, we'll see you next time.
The world